Welcome to Kalispell, Montana, September the 2nd of 2017. I'm in Conrad Memorial Cemetery. It's about a mile or two east of the train depot in old downtown Kalispell, Montana, standing at the grave of William H. Slippery Bill Morrison, who lived from 1848 to 1932. I've told many stories about him on my railroad, the Glacier Line, primarily that he was the one that donated a huge tract of land at Summit, Montana. He donated that land to the United States government, and there is Marias Pass Memorial Square. It has a statue to Roosevelt, John F. Stevens, who discovered Marias Pass, and also to Morrison himself on a plaque inscribed on a rock there. And for those of you interested where this grave is, it is like in the extreme northeast corner of this cemetery. Northeast corner in section G is like George. Not even his close associates knew anything about William H. Slippery Bill Morrison's background, where he was from or where he was born. A bachelor, he lived at Summit, Montana before the arrival of the Great Northern Railroad. Well educated, Morrison used excellent grammar and demonstrated a bright, unusual vocabulary. Some say he was a graduate of Oxford University, but his speech was Western in character. He worked as a conductor for the Great Northern Railroad. One day his train rammed a work train. No one was hurt, but Morrison did not wait for demerits. He walked off the job and left the railroad for others to run. He worked for a time as a forest ranger in Flathead National Forest, but most of his life he was a trapper and a prospector, living by his wits. Morrison was an elderly man when I knew him. At that time he would rather make $10 playing cards than making $100 any other way. At that time, 1890 to 92, McCarthyville, Montana, 5 miles west of Marias Pass, was booming. Morrison spent most of his time playing poker there. The fact that he came out of this rough and tumble western town with all his hide intact was quite an achievement. Morrison told me that the melting spring snows in McCarthyville 1 year later revealed 9 bodies as evidence of the cruel and extracting moral code of the town. John F. Stevens, credited by the Great Northern with the discovery of Marias Pass, spoke at the dedication of the Stevens statue at the summit. In the course of his speech, Stevens told of the hardships in searching for the pass over the Continental Divide. He explained that it was December and he'd nearly perished in the blizzard at that point. At that point, Morrison walked up, speaking from the crowd, and he said, "Why didn't you come over to my house? I was living right over there," he said, pointing to his cabin. Morrison had squatter rights on 160 acres at Summit. It was never surveyed, the boundaries were never defined, but he claimed all the suitable land in the area. When someone proposed to stake a claim anywhere, Morrison would protest and say that he took the claim in the area. His claim reverted to the government upon his death. His cabin was near the railroad tracks at Summit. He was a friend of all the trainmen. Often he rode the engine cab to Essex and back for mail and supplies. He maintained a bar in his cabin and was set up for a poker game anytime someone was foolish enough to play him. He had many friends and no enemies that I ever knew. Although he never worked at any legitimate job during the last 30 years of his life, he was never at odds with the law at any time that I knew him. Morrison was a reader of heavy literature. At times his vocabulary ranged beyond the comprehension of his listeners. As a frontier philosopher, he often expounded theories in the areas of his expertise. He maintained that whiskey was a virtue and that gambling was a privilege and was an essential part of modern man's activities. He died in 1932 after a short illness. He was 84. Buried in Conrad Memorial Cemetery, March 6, 1932. Charles Hash, then assistant supervisor, Flathead National Forest, was one of his pallbearers. The other pallbearers were railroad employees. The people around Summit secured permission from the Forest Service to tear down Morrison's cabin, which had become badly deteriorated. His land reverted to the federal government. I took his bar top from the cabin and made it into a clothes chest. It was redwood. It was 14 feet long, 30 inches wide. It was clear select timber, but I found one .45 bullet and some shot embedded in it. The bar top was brought to Summit by an ox team before the railroad. And that is the end of the story. This was out of a Flathead history, foresthistory.org that I read that short dissertation with. I'll close by just taking a shot around the grave site, so if somebody is ever searching for this, they'd like to see it in person, they can do that. Actually, my wife Connie was the one that located this. We were just out here wandering around. It was like finding a needle in a haystack, but she managed to find it. And if I can keep my shadow out of the shot, we'll be doing good. There's a cemetery road over here right by the white fences and an angel statue. And this grave marker is not far from that site. So I hope you all found this interesting. I've always wanted to come to the site where Mr. Morrison was laid. Rest in peace, Slipperyville.